Okay.
It's all yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Um, I I'm not usually up this early. I'm not a morning person. I usually get to sack around 2. Um, but in radio, you can change those things. And 2 days ago, well, today's Wednesday, Sunday, I was diagnosed with COVID. So it's a good thing this is on Zoom. I have always been a radio listener. I grew up, I started to grow up before TV, and my folks had a 1935 GE floor model radio to which I listened daily. And that's how I got to know radio and music. And I DX'd, that's long distance radio listening on AM. And I did that all over the country. So my favorite stations were in Boston and Buffalo and Cincinnati and Cleveland Place. And that way, it says my internet connection is unstable. Well, surprise, everything in this house is unstable, including the owner. Okay, so that's how I learned music. And growing up in Arlington, I lived near WARL, and Dick Seri was brought down from Utica. He and his brother Bill, they worked for a station up there, which I think was owned by Dick Clark's father. And as the WARL prided itself in being the first hillbilly station in the East Coast. And as the 60s folk boom hit, they said, play folk music. And Dick Seri said, sure. And Music Americana began. He also began hootenannies at the Cellar Door, the club in Georgetown, 34th and M. In college, I started singing, and with a musician friend who was a member of my brother's fraternity, and we ended up dating. We ended up married, ended up divorced. Hey, he became the house musician at the Cellar Door. We hung out there, and when they needed a typist upstairs to do contracts or take reservations, I would fill in. And the Cellar Door was Dick Seri's sponsor on Music Americana on WARL. So he knew that I could work in an office like that. When he needed an admin assistant, he called and said, would you be available a couple hours a day, Monday through Friday? I said, oh, okay. And by then I had a little baby, and my husband, of course, being a full-time musician, he taught afternoons and worked evenings. So I could go out for a couple hours mornings, and that worked. So when Folkies started going electric and having bands around them, Dick didn't like that. And the DX stations I was listening to, they all played that stuff. So I offered to program it for him. And I've been asked what college did I go to. I went to Catholic U. They closed down the radio station the year before I got there and opened it up again the year after I left. I figured they must have known something. So Dick Seri thought about it for a bit and thought, well, if she's going to program it, she's got a good voice. Why don't I let her do that? So he tried it out on weekends and then switched it in April of '68. I took over Monday through Friday, 9 to midnight, carrying the LPs into the Roslyn building and up the 12 flights on the elevator. Now, we all know what happened in April '68. when Dr. King was killed, that put WARL into 24-hour news mode. AM had been all news, but then it was music in the evenings. That's when Arthur Arundel decided he was going to keep it all news 24 hours a day. And our last show was the first week of June. And I walked from the Roslyn building over to National Cemetery and watched the Robert Kennedy cortege come in. That was quite a time. Dick got us both on WHFS, before it was WHFS, for a couple months in that summer. But the summer of '68, suddenly the Democratic Convention arrived and all hell broke loose. So I commented on that. I mean, folk music is topical, right? So I got topical and they didn't like it over there. So we were dumped. A year later, I got a call. Would you like to? We kind of like that music you were doing. We sometimes called it underground music. And so I had just had my second kid. There was no way I was going to run a radio station. So it went to these other guys and they ran with it. But in '70, WETA radio station was born. And Fred asked me to come aboard and do that underground music. So summer of '70, I did, and I called it Subway because after all, it was underground music. And then the following January, Fred decided that the community station, 75,000 watts worth, was just too variety for the average listener. Nobody knew what they were going to hear when they tuned in. So I was one of the many things that was dropped at that point. Late '72, I auditioned for Classical Weekend, and Fred liked my voice. Dick Sari was riffed in March of '73 because he'd been working for commercial stations, and he wasn't, these public station rules were different, and so they let him go and asked me, please. No, they told me I would be doing the folk music show. And by the way, the afternoon show Dick had in 7 weeks was going to be turned into a jazz show. So over 7 weeks, please transition from folk to jazz. Okay, I knew music. So after that, I would do classical and folk, public affairs. I was a board operator for other people. I became an engineer. Excuse me. When Landsberg's was hoped to become an arts center downtown, we took our station to it during an entire weekend. We brought a studio in and broadcast from the outside of, or the where you could see us through the windows at Landsberg's. I became producer of events we recorded to broadcast, Washington Revels, things at Wolf Trap.
Boy, that doesn't interest me
The
at
King
all.
Singers up there, jazz.
Not one bit.
just- Who am I hearing there? The Corcoran Gallery of Art, we had recorded contemporary chamber music there and broadcast it. Well, then the station decided they didn't want to broadcast that anymore, but I was already into working with these guys. And so for 40 years, I recorded contemporary chamber music at the Corcoran Gallery. I have all that downstairs. Folklife Festival, National Folk Festival, I toured with that. That took me across the country, pre-recording my show, and traveled to fests and broadcast some of those when I got back. So I'm was all that time I was still active in the Folklore Society of Greater Washington, on the board, booking concerts, running concerts. I trained to the West Coast, I think it was 89, to join in founding of the North American Folk Music and Dance Alliance, which is now the Folk Alliance, now based in Kansas City. And it was amazing to work annual conferences around the US and Canada, including Calgary. One time I did a fundraising show from Calgary, Alberta. And when I was doing that, I had to set it up. So I set it up by calling CBC and saying, if I needed to get audio from Calgary to, let's say Toronto, how would I do that? Well, we've got lines. Okay, when would this be? This would be Saturday night. Oh, okay, you could use those. How much would it cost me? Well, they're not for rent because we already own them. Okay, but could I use them? Oh, of course, you could use them. So as it turned out, we sent audio from our hotel to downtown Calgary, hooked it up to CBC, which took it across country to Toronto, where they sent it up to the satellite, where NPR could download it in DC and then upload it again for WETA to download it. And in the studio, we had the boss and another producer, and the three of us conducted a fundraiser. It was just amazing how it was just, maybe a second or two pause between the two sides. We had whole conversations. We had musicians who were at the conference. They were in Calgary. DC people, seems to me Kathy Fink was there. And, we had great conversations. I think Charlie Pilzer was there too. So these annual conferences have taken me around North America, and I love them. And of course, in between, I would interview, Pete Seeger and Arlo Guthrie, Judy Collins, Mary Black, one of my favorites, and all the while interviewing politicians and public affairs people and doing whatever needed to be done. I was the fill-in. Was it jazz? Okay. Mary filled in. Was it opera? Well, okay. I didn't do very well, but I did it. A Midwestern station wanted to interview Senator Charles McMathias. They wanted it to sound live, the two sides. So they did their part live, and they wanted the recording that we had at the Capitol to merge it. So what we could do was record it live. Then I take that back. I happen to be the staffer who was available at the time to do it. So I took a recorder in, and we did our part. And then I take it back, we'd put it online and send it to them. They could merge it together and it would sound like they were both in the same room. So we finished the interview, and the senator turns to me and he says, thank you very much, Ms. Cliff. I listen to you all the time. I'm fond of your work. Thank you. So sometimes you do get, a thanks. So I was also a single mom. So I was more flexible. I had to be flexible all the time. And the Northern Virginia Folk Festival, which I ran for a while, which Arlington kind of shifted away from, and what I have from them are in the Arlington Library. I'm still looking for a home for the Mary Archives. I produced the National Symphony for broadcast, TV, and radio, National Heritage Awards for NPR broadcast. At times I had to teach classical hosts how to prepare interviews and how to deliver news. When they reversed it, then, and we dealt with going from analog to digital. And after 35 years, WETA said, well, they're all classical. They're going all classical and they're going without me. And I said, okay. And they traded Garrison Keillor and me to WAMU. And we were there for a few years. And then, and by the way, when Prairie Home Companion came to Washington, I was the one to coordinate their stuff with our stuff. A local producer arranged for local musicians to join them. And we were at Lisner Auditorium. I arranged for that. Then, and then when we were riffed from WAMU, I had to find a new station for Traditions if it was going to continue. Could have possibly gone to Tacoma, but traveling to Tacoma across the river back and forth on a regular basis at night as I age is not something I was looking forward to doing. So I backed off on that. I had friends at WPFW. Okay, but that's a great station downtown. And my problem was I would have to find a parking place. And then I have to drive home at night, of course. So when WERA in Arlington opened up, and Andy Rosenberg called and said, hey, come and check out this. And so I did. And I've been there ever since. And I'm looking for my replacement. Over the years, you know, people say, well, who is it that you interviewed? All the important people. The important people didn't, everybody was important. I mean, I have occasions. I was driving Tom Rush, whom I've just loved for years, driving him from downtown or from Georgetown to the station for an interview. And we stopped at the corner of 24th and M. Excuse me, and I said to him, see that pile of debris over there? That used to be my high school. They have shut it down. It's since become a hotel. But I said, half of me is tempted to run over there and get myself a brick or two to remember. And we were stopped at the traffic light, and he calmly stepped out of the car, went over and picked up a couple of bricks and said, will these do? I still have one of my high school bricks. I sent one to my little sister who went there too. The Beacon did a feature on me in June of 20th. I'm a member of the Folk DJ Hall of Fame. John Kelly did a Washington Post article, and Mark Fisher did a couple. And over the years, and one of the interesting sidebars was back in 1963, having hung out with all of these folkies, and the Kingston Trio were on Capitol Records, and they were replacing one of their members. When Dave left, Capitol figured, okay, the public is not going to accept a replacement, except that they did. So Capitol had been working with the Journeymen to replace the Kingston Trio. And I knew the Journeymen, and I had hung out with all these folks at the Cellar Door and the Shadows. And so when the Beatles came to town, their first gig in DC, I had my carpool, excuse me, here voice, asked my carpool to drop me off near the arena. And the Beatles were being interviewed by Carol James, CJ the DJ, with whom I later served on the AFTRA board here in DC. I was on their board for a number of years too. See, I just am a glutton for punishment. So when I got to the arena area, I looked around and sure enough, there was Bill, the Capitol agent here in this town. They had distributed in every big city. And there he was. And I walked up to him and I said, hey, would you introduce me to these guys? He said, well, yeah, I could do that, but why don't you come over to the hotel? Well, I was dating a musician and I knew better than to say yes. I may have been weird, but I wasn't stupid. So sure enough, as they came out, Bill introduced me to John and then Paul and then George. And it had snowed that morning, and so the sidewalk was slippery. And so Ringo slid past me on the ice. I will always remember that. It was more approachable than a lot of your rockers. All fine and good. But to me, it was, what do I know? Could I go over to Wolf Trap with equipment and hand it to their engineers and say, would you hook this up for me? And then our engineer would walk in and push buttons, and it was done, and it was recorded. And that particular one, King Singers, we made cassettes of it for our donors. So, it's just amazing the things that you can do. Was I taught all of this stuff? Not really. I learned by standing behind other people who were doing this stuff. So I listened to people who were doing what I liked being done, and that's how I learned to do it. I'm not good as a tech person. As you may have noticed, I've been fighting with 3 computers here this morning in order to get started, just a little late. So, I hope I don't know whether that's inspiration or not, but I'm still looking for, excuse me. Like I said, I was diagnosed with COVID the other day. I think I'm almost done with it. But my trouble is I have 55 years of radio in my house. And I want my house back. So like 40 years of contemporary chamber music, I have to find a way to have it digitized so that the Library of Congress will take it. All of these interviews back to the Iron Butterfly in 1968. So, do I have a list of them? No, I don't. Did I keep track? Did I record all these things? No, I recorded some of them. I have reel-to-reels, files and files. I have 120 linear feet of LPs back to the 40s when I started listening. They're great memories. They come the memories come back in fits and starts. Somebody will ask me, do you remember doing such a, no, I don't. And weeks later, I might, I remember that now. So it does happen.
Have to read the chat. We can read it to you, by the way.
Oh, I don't see anything.
Okay, well, there was a question asking, how did you get your audio engineering chops? But I think you just answered that.
Standing behind other guys. And when the other guy had to go hit the John, I would sit and then, okay, I can take care of that, and that's how I learned, literally. On the road at folk festivals, they would have an odd number of women staffers. And so they'd call me and say, can you come? Oh, okay, sure. And, down in the Chamizal in Texas, sometimes, Mike Rivers and I would trade off. He was the engineer, he was the Gypsy Studio guy, recorded a gazillion people, and he would take care of all of the tech stuff, and I would move stage stuff around. I had learned how to do that. And so one day, 2 days, we would work it that way. And then the next day he'd say, hey, you want to switch off? Oh, okay. So then I did the audio. He'd set it up, but then I'd do the audio and he would do the stage. So, we just switched off and sometimes I had to ask for something, but not terribly often.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that you felt like all of the performers you worked with were special, but are there any that really stand out in your mind as your own personal favorites, or the people that just you thought were so amazing, head and shoulders above the rest?
Oh, there are dozens. Mary Black, the Irish singer. I got to interview her too. Wait a minute, what was her name? Good, begins with a G. Her name is not going to come to me. I can see her in front of me. Mama Cass Elliot. What a voice. What a voice. And I was dating Jonathan Everhart, Sloop Singers. And so as it turned out, he was up there and he called me up and he said, hey, think you can get away for the weekend? The captain has taken the weekend off, so we've got an extra bed. Oh, okay. So I came up and I was aboard the sloop for a weekend, and there I listened to all that stuff, was able to sing along. And then eventually when they recorded at Pete's, I think my name is on that. I hesitate to go back and look too much, but it's an LP, and Hiding in the Corner is my name because I was one of the people in the room. So you just never know what you run with, the opportunities that present themselves. Did I plan on getting into radio? Never. I always say I fell into it and I haven't figured out how to get out. And I'm working on that right now. So,
Can people get access to prior Traditions recordings or any of your other recordings?
I don't know how. I guess there are some online. I just don't know. Um, I did not record my shows unless I wasn't going to be in town, like the weekend that I hopped a train to, and I'm not much of a flyer. And I hopped Amtrak and went to the West Coast. The fun thing about that is that when you go to the West Coast from DC, if you go the most direct route, they throw you out in New Orleans and refuse to pick you up until the next day. So the first thing you do is you find your hotel room. Then you look around for food. It's fabulous anywhere. And then you just start to walk and listen. It's everywhere. And coming back, they dump you out about 10 o'clock at night and pick you up at like 3 in the afternoon. So you had to get up a little earlier. Okay. And you're all set to go. And you go down to the water and have beignets for breakfast. So I visited New Orleans a couple of times via, because I had to, via the train. And then in 20, the Folk Alliance had conference in New Orleans. And coming back, I had what I thought. I grew up with two heavy smoking parents and I became a heavy smoker. Then I backed off. So, the one thing I haven't done, and I see Carol there, and I don't dance. Don't ask me. I sit and I react to music all the time. I dance in my seat. That's it.
Well, we have a number of reminiscences here I'd like to share with you. One of them is somebody who was taking a landscape design course in the early 90s and spent Saturday nights at the drawing board listening to you.
Cool.
I wanted to thank you for some great nights. Another person who said, hearing your voice brings back wonderful memories. Your voice calmed me and your music soothed me. And thank you for that. Another one saying your work on traditions brought so much pleasure and joy. And I think that goes for pretty much everybody listening here today.
Well, just to give you an idea, I don't know whether you can see that. This is a page of my Who's Where listing, which is on my website. I post them there, but then I read them. And sometimes it's just way too long. I mean, for a 3-hour show, and over the 3 hours, there might be 20 minutes of this stuff, but it's information. It is information. So that Southern Maryland Traditional Music and Dance Contra is at Christ Church Parish Hall in Chaptico, Maryland, who is playing for the open band. The stage production currently at the Arena Stage, music and lyrics by the Avett Brothers, Tuesday through Sunday from the end of November to the end of the year. In fact, now it's been extended for a couple of weeks and it's gotten fabulous reviews. It's about the sinking of a whaling ship. There's just so much information, and I've been the one foolish enough since 1973 We need a group, you know?
Mary, your audio or your video keeps pausing, so I'm going to try turning off your camera and we'll see if that helps any.
Your network bandwidth is low. That's what it says.
And others have suggested if other people turn off their cameras, it might help.
Well, there are only a few cameras that are on, actually.
Well, everybody in the audience has their cameras on.
Yeah, well, I don't see them at all.
Well, anyway, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so I've been trying to find, and there hasn't been a lot of interest among younger generations toward what we call folk music. Now, my definition of folk music is that it has to do with culture. It's culturally connected. So there are people who think that folk music is what I call is WG squared, white guys with guitars. And I guess that's what it was in the early 60s. But blues is fabulous folk music. Cajun, second line, shanties, topical, labor songs. People are still writing topical music like crazy. Emma's Revolution duo just recently came out with a CD, and much of it is topical and a delight. And some of it I hesitate to play it too early at night because people might get upset with it. Well, this is radio. And the latest John McCutcheon and Tom Paxton had a few. They did a duo album recently released, and two friends, and Tom Paxton, of course, lives in Alexandria here, and it just amazing the music that he has given us. And they can be very topical. So can McCutcheon.
Mary, can you talk a little bit about the role of the National Folk Festival in the music scene?
Well, the National Folk Festival on the Eastern Shores in a place, it gives an opportunity to create an organization that will run its own festival after they leave. So it spent well more than 3 years here in the DC area. And then they started on the road. I mean, it did well in Richmond. The Richmond Folk Festival in October is the ones I walked into. Grant's Tomb was a pub in DC. My stock rose a lot that night. And he just, it was an open mic, so he did a couple songs later, which was cool. But you just never know who you're gonna run into with these and make friends with. And the National Folk Festival, they headed west now. They spent 3 years, I guess, in in Butte, Montana. That has quite an interesting history because word went out to Irish immigrants that there was work to be had in Butte, Montana. And so whole bunches of Irish immigrants headed to Butte. And there was quite a cultural connection there. And then after Butte, they came back east on the Eastern Shore, Salisbury. That has interesting cultural history. And I'm not sure where they're going next. They're going 3 more years somewhere else. I suppose I could look it up, but I doubt my computers would work. The one that's working now, I don't want to upset it.
As a follow-up question, can you talk to us a little bit about the Folklore Society of Greater Washington for those of us that aren't that familiar with it?
Mary, you're muted.
What's that, Liz?
Mary is muted.
Mary, can you unmute your computer?
Unmuted?
There we go.
Okay. It suddenly did its own thing. It does that.
Yep.
So where was I? Oh, the Folklore Society. Chuck and Nan Purdue. They found this lovely singer and they decided they need to get him some work, and they figured they needed an organization to help because he was not the only person who could do this. And this was John Jackson, who became a good friend. He was a grave digger. He dug for St. James Church, for the graveyard up there in Falls Church. And I remember John and when his wife died, a lot of us went to her funeral. And then he kept going, and when he caught cancer, he decided not to have it operated on. And I remember I turned down a perfectly good New Year's Eve date with a good friend I was hanging with at the time to go to the church nearby here and see John Jackson, because I was afraid it was his last concert. And in fact, it was. He never learned to read or write until late in life. And a woman who was agenting him at the time was teaching him. And I have on my bulletin board downstairs a postcard that she wrote for him, and then he signed it. And that was most unusual because as a rule, he couldn't sign things. So that's a fine treasure, it is. And that's how the Folklore Society was founded. That knowing that there was all this great music and undiscovered people and need for them to get some work and visibility. And in this area, so many people came from the mountains to get work in DC and in Baltimore. And they brought, in many cases, their music with them. And so we had blues, we had bluegrass. It all came from this mountain stuff and nearby. And it was just, I mean, you had to run away not to hear it, you know, it was just great. Excuse me. And we had a number of venues that would play this stuff. And there are just so many performers. I have long lists of them. I have piles of their CDs. And the Folklore Society, unfortunately, is understaffed at the moment. Again, it's been difficult to get Gen Z interested in this. Excuse me. Like I said, I'm not usually up this early. My throat is not used to this. I have a bit of coffee.
You mentioned Gen Z. Are there any kind of outreach efforts to try and raise awareness and interest in folk and roots music among younger people?
Well, obviously not strong enough yet. We're working on it. The Folklore Society is trying. The you know, there are efforts in the Library of Congress for sure, and you know, people like Jake Blunt and oh, what's her name? They just took over Yo-Yo Ma's organization. There are a few, but these are people who have been doing this more years than you would think, given their age. But so we are always looking for new blood. And again, I'm looking at the same thing. I've been in touch with a young woman who's interested, but she's been otherwise occupied the last month or so. She might show up on my show on Saturday. We'll see. The Folklore Society of Greater Washington used to be in one place all the time, and then you'd go out to other places on occasion. I remember running a Pete Seeger concert benefit at Lisner Auditorium for the Folklore Society, and okay, that was one thing, but usually their concerts were on Upper 16th Street, and that worked while we had a staff member who was open to us. Well, then they needed more and more income, so they kept having more and more opportunities, and the opportunities involved an Ethiopian radio station and one concert we were in the middle of, when all of a sudden there was loud music starting downstairs. They had booked 2 concerts that night, and you know, we just kind of put up with it. But not too long after that, we lost the connection with that place, that staffer, and we could no longer afford it. Rhiannon Giddens, thank you, Fred. I think she's been doing some TV too, but Rhiannon Giddens. Oh, Jane was there that night. Oh, that was a weird night, wasn't it? So, you know, and we celebrated at Glen Echo, we celebrated 50 years. We had a big 50-year party, and that was cool. And that doesn't seem to impress people anymore. You know, what's the latest thing? Well, I don't give a flying you know what. What's the latest thing? Give me something with history. Give me something with a long connection. You know, if I want to, you know, need to tell people the story of how the Beatles started, or the story of Tom Rush going to all of those clubs in Boston to hear those blues guys, you know, so he could learn to do them. So I don't know. I'm glad it worked. I'm glad I have a pension, a union pension after 35 years working at WETA. And on occasion, I need some advice for something, I'll call Dan Devaney over WETA and say, hey, give me a hand here, will you? And he is always open to that.
So Mary, if people want to help you with digitizing your archives or organizing them and, you know, helping you clear out all the stuff you've got in your house in an orderly way, or if there's anybody out there that wants to be the next Traditions host, who should they contact?
Well, they can email me. My email usually works. It's slow, but it usually works. Or you can contact the station, WERA.FM. We are online. Actually, we have not been broadcasting for a couple of weeks now because there's been some problem in the transmitter. And I'm going to go over there today and offer them some assistance on that. Because it's gonna take some equipment. It'll take a couple more days to get it up there. And we just get, oh, thank you, Liz. Yeah, we just get online. Now, see, I live in Falls Church. I live on the other side of a ridge, on the other side of Harris Teeter. So I have to listen online. But when I get in the car to drive into Arlington, I hear just the automation and the station ID. The shows aren't broadcasting, and we're not doing ourselves any favors by doing that.
Right.
So, you know, we've got to get that up and running, I hope, in the next couple of days, and we'll all shout hallelujah, and we will be moving within a month or so, because Comcast had rented that whole building, and when they renegotiated their contract, we weren't part of it. Unfortunately, we weren't given much warning on that. So now we're looking at two options. We might end up two different places. We've got radio and television. I don't do TV. I have a face for radio. So, you know, we will see. And Tessa may join me on Saturday.
And Mary, I want to thank you for all of the many contributions you've given to WERA. You have been a strong supporter of WERA and Arlington Independent Media, and that's greatly appreciated.
Yeah, well, thank you. I had a good friend who was a strong supporter of music and recording and folk music. And when he left us, unfortunately, he had no relatives. And so he left me more money than I could envision. And so I've been careful to deal that out.
One thing that amused me was when I was still on the phone with Mary at the start of this meeting, Cheryl said something and she said, "Oh, that's Cheryl's voice."
Well, and it's going to be whatever happens in terms of your program, Mary, they have big shoes to fill. And I'll be curious to know, if you are going to have a major role in helping to find that replacement, or are you going to kind of turn it over to that person and just let him or her do as they will with the program? I was just curious.
Yeah, as I have told them, as I've said on the air, it doesn't have to be Saturday night. It doesn't have to be 3 hours. It doesn't have to be one person. We've got a little interest from 3 or 4 people, and it would be great to have a community to do that. And we could trade off. I might even fill in on occasion. As far as the who's where's, that's what takes the time.
Right.
That's what takes the time, because I have a long list of places, venues that might book folk type music. And who defines that? Well, who runs the show,
Right.
So, I mean, I do trad jazz. I do piano bench music. Is the Beatles piano bench music? Doesn't everybody know Beatles songs? Of course, sing along.
Well, I'm just noticing that it is now 11:06. Gary, are there any other questions in the chat, or are we ready to end today's presentation or program?
No, I don't really see anything else. I think we've covered everything.
Okay.
I join
Well-
everybody in wishing Mary a speedy recovery from.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Yes. I mean, thank you so much, Mary. I mean, as I said, I've known you for many years and you are a true legend. And wow, what a story. If you had any time, you ought to write a book in terms of your many adventures.
Another project.
Another project, right. I have books here written by friends of mine that I haven't had time to read. And that's what I'm looking around for the time to do that. To be able to sit in a chair and read a book, another book by Pete Kennedy, or another one about, by Garnet Rogers, or Garnet's a good friend. In fact, last time, he's a big guy,
Right.
And last time I saw him was at the Jam and Java a couple of years ago. And during intermission, he came back to, sell things, or right after the show. And I walked up to him, and he calmly picked me up in both of his arms and lifted me right off the floor.
Wow.
I cracked up.
Well, you have so many stories to tell, and thank you for sharing some of them with us today, and thank you for getting up early this morning so that you could to
Especially
join
since
us.
since I spent the night before last in Arlington Hospital emergency room.
I'm sorry, you were at
The night before last, I spent the night at Arlington Hospital emergency room.
Oh, because of your COVID?
Apparently,
Yeah.
the pain in my arm and the coughing, I got really scared, and I called a cab and went over to the emergency room.
Yeah.
So
Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah.
Well, we hope that you will recover, and we wish you a very, very happy holiday season and look forward to new adventures in the new year. So with that, we're going to sign off. I'll just give you a quick hint that next Wednesday, our guest is Dr. Julia Dodo. And I know Dr. Dodo as well. She's the assistant professor at Health and Human Performance at Marymount University, and she's an expert on plant-based foods. And in fact, next week I will put I had her on my TV show. So, but she's going to talk about sweet treat swaps and how you can make healthy cuisine for the holidays. And in fact, I guess she's even going to make ginger snap cookies and apple pie ice cream. So be sure and check out next week and learn about plant-based holiday baking and other kinds of foods. And so with that, I guess we will close out today and have a good week and enjoy the holiday season with friends and family, and we'll see you next week.